folks, back continuing my series on geopolitical views and the shifting sands around the Indo-Pacific. The key to India's, like I said, stance against China going forward is going to have to be Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, when I say Atmanirbhar Bharat, that means really Atmanirbhar Bharat. Atmanirbhar Bharat means that you have to have self-confidence. A lot of the self-confidence, as a lot of people have said, India just doesn't have the legs to stand up to China, because China's way ahead in terms of, obviously the amount of money they spend on defense, their economy, and so on and so forth. However, as I've always pointed out, we are at a point of time in geopolitical shifting sands with China totally now in the shit list of almost every possible country there is, barring some of the weaker countries in the world. This is just about the right time that we borrow some legs. And one of the most important legs we've obviously borrowed is the Quad. And I'm glad that the Indian dispensation in this particular government has shed the old clothing that came with non-alliance and independent foreign policy and decided to take this leap of faith. Because at the end of the day, the most important part of that Quad is the United States. Whether we like it or not, it was the nuclear deal that actually set the ball in motion for a lot of relationships that have subsequently developed and gathered steam, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it is the United Arab Emirates, whether it's even Japan, Australia. A lot had to do with that nuclear deal and the subsequent relationship that we developed with the United States. So it's really important for me and everybody else to note that this is a relationship that is going to be the most critical for India in terms of its technology, in terms of its economic growth, and also in terms of its defense preparedness. Anyway, so what do we have? So what we have to do is shed this whole old non-trust business which the Lutyens Delhi crowd generally comes up with, generally the Nehruvian guys, and including the Congress, I think, because I think the Congress fought Manmohan Singh tooth and nail, right, against the nuclear deal. So and the second term the deal went nowhere because of the Congress folks, right? So you can actually blame them for all our backwardness in a sense. But look at what's happening in the United States. Indian Americans taking over US. Biden on call with Mohan. Okay. Then you have this by Alexander Slater and Zuzar Gadiali. Pressure and pushback. US backed India in standoff with China. The partnership must be built on. What do they say? The Indian military's courage, audacity, and resolve appears to have delivered a major push towards stability on India's northern borders. After Indian and Chinese soldiers engaged in a skirmish in the Galwan Valley in June, disengagement was completed and verified in Pangong Tso without any additional loss of life. This may look to some as snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. The drawback of troops and tanks marks a milestone and provides an example to the rest of the world on how to check China's revisionist actions. And it says the most important contribution to the international backing came from the United States. Both Donald Trump and Biden administration, as well as key members of the US Congress, spoke with one voice about the unacceptability of China's actions and committed to closer defense cooperation with India. And it says, for China, the message was clear. A bipartisan consensus in the US supported strengthening India's ability to defend its borders and safeguard the Indo-Pacific and India. A sometimes reluctant partner embraced American efforts to enhance its power projection across multiple geographies. The cost of confrontation in Ladakh and elsewhere would be higher than China originally estimated. Then he says, India's strategy for ending the current confrontation shows the way forward by working with the United States to enhance its military capabilities. It deters expansionist activity and enables its armed forces to nip problems in the bud. This is what's really important, right? Moving from the words to actions will be a win-win for India, bringing greater stability to its borders and creating new opportunity to enhance security and prosperity in the face of global challenges, right? So what does C. Raja Mohan write? Despite the doubters, India-US relationship has grown by leaps and bounds. Delhi is now well positioned to raise the Quad agenda to a high level at a digital summit of its leaders this weekend, which it did. That the Quad meeting, this is the important part, that the Quad is meeting at the summit level well before Biden has spent 2 months at the White House underlines the growing gap between our foreign policy debate and policy. The roots of this problem on the Indian side at least lie in the enduring reluctance of Delhi's foreign policy community to either acknowledge or accept the unfolding transformation of India's ties with the United States. It also rests in continuing underestimation of Delhi's capacity to rework its great power relationships to meet India's changing interests and circumstances. Then what it says, even as it continuously misjudged the US, the Indian foreign policy elite has not appreciated India's agency to shape the relationship with America. The conviction that India is perennially under US pressure to accept political harmful for itself further distorts the discourse in the media and among the chattering class. This is where you have to get away. The NDA government, in power since 2014, had the political will to build on the US initiative launched by the UPA government. The new India no longer wrings its hands in dealing with the US. It relishes the large room for strategic bargaining with America. Even more important, Delhi is no longer a reluctant partner to Washington. Over the last 3 years, it revived the Quad, shaped the coalition's approach to strategic connectivity, and has demonstrated its leadership in waxing diplomacy. Delhi is now well positioned to raise the Quad agenda to a higher level at the digital summit which it did, right? Why then the persistent doubts in Delhi about the US partnership? One part of it is the ingrained ideological bias in the dominant foreign policy elite. It was generous to a fault when it came to assessing China's interests and motivations, but always unduly suspicious of America, folks, and more after the break. So, what does India need? India needs to be Atam Nirbhar Bharat. And what does Atam Nirbhar really mean? It means that whatever means, whatever assist we can get, we need to develop the economic and defense heft of this nation. Defense heft will develop with economic heft, and with all this process is only possible with holding hands with people who can provide us with the necessary bandwidth and the scale of technology and education and science and money necessary to go forward. It's not possible standing alone in as they say, in splendid isolation like we've done in the past. In fact, we have to take the example of China, where it was a contradiction. This is a communist country. It still shook hands with the United States with Nixon, and then bided its time. It bided its time. It knew the US was completely focused on breaking up the USSR because that was considered your communist hegemon trying to change the systems in the world, and it bided its time till now. By then, it had built up its economic heft, it had built up its technology. Unfortunately, it unsheathed this sword, in my opinion, a couple of years before it should have. For whatever reason it did it, she's megalomaniac. I don't know what the calculation was. But had they waited for another 2 years, right, they probably would have got their pound of flesh and more. Now, I think they are in this gray zone. Whether they get out of it, nobody knows. But India needs to do the same thing. Shed its old inhibitions, tie up with the West, and bide its time. Luckily for India, as opposed to China, our systems are more or less similar. So what do we have here? As Sriram Chumlia writes, taming the dragon. Apart from furthering military ties, General Austin's India visit signals a rebalancing initiative where Washington and New Delhi are not worried about upsetting Beijing. This is the important part. He says, if marriages are made in heaven, then strategic partnerships are destined by the compelling forces of shared geopolitical vision and threats. The visit of the new US Defense Secretary General Lloyd Austin to India from March 19th to 21st is occurring at a time of heightened convergence of interests between Washington and New Delhi, both of which are vexed by China's expansionism and convinced that only a coordinated pushback can tame the dragon. The Donald Trump administration concluded towards the end of its terms that it was a fantasy to expect China to play by the rules because President Xi Jinping's China's dream was to undermine and overthrow the Western order and replace it with a Sino-centric one. And this is the same, we need to shed the same kind of dream. The year 2020 was a watershed for Washington to bury and bid goodbye to its engage and hedge approach to Beijing, and the year 2020 is the same for India, folks. Xi's simultaneous elbowing of Taiwan, Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Australia, and India portended a China-dominated Asia, a stepping stone to the US's dreaded scenario of a China-dominated world, just like the USSR-dominated world earlier, before the Cold War, during the Cold War. The Biden administration's refrain about China's coercion and aggression indicates that the blinkers are off. America will not chase yet another misguided reset in ties with China because she has transformed China and made it impossible to return it to a path of moderation and compromise. General Austin is getting all eyes and ears in India because a similar process of strategic clarification has matured in New Delhi. Then he says, purchase from the US, Russia, France and Israel bolstered India's military capability and showed China, which was barred from buying weapons from Western countries, that there were limits to the asymmetry. This is important. These weapons sourced from the West are the reason that China had to back down and will continue to back down as long as we play our cards right. Now what he said, apart from weaponry, the US's diversionary pressure on the Chinese military in the Taiwan Straits, the East China Sea and the South China Sea is crucial to keep the heat on Beijing and not relieve it to concentrate all the energy on India's land and maritime spaces. The prospect of a two-front war ranging from China's eastern seaboard to the icy height of the Himalayas is not a rosy one for Xi. Just like the Indian army might have chickened out thinking that they have to fight from the east to the west between Pakistan and China, China is facing far greater dilemma, and this is something that our military should take note of when it gives suggestions to the government and when the MEA takes a stand on how to deal with China. The prospects of a two-front war ranging from if China retreats from friction points at the NSC, it will be due to consistent multi-sided pressure on it. Limiting the India-US strategic partnership will weaken New Delhi's hand and embolden Beijing to raise more demands. When Biden administration also trying to coax other Asian nations to join the Quad, China could gradually find it harder to divide and rule the region. A Quad plus coalition is worth investing in by India. General Austin praised for India's leadership role and growing engagement with like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific signals that a broader rebalancing mission is underway in which Washington and New Delhi are the principals and neither is confused about or afraid of upsetting China, and this is the difference that's happened and India must build on. What do we say? What's happening currently? West sanctions Chinese officials over Xinjiang, abuses Beijing, hits back at EU. Now EU has jumped in. It says the move follows 2 days of talks between US and Chinese officials last week, which laid bare the tensions between the world's two largest economies. So EU is on the bandwagon, right? India, China to focus on hot springs in next round of talks. I'm not sure it's going anywhere. We may have given up our tactical advantage, but let us continue to build on our geopolitical advantage that we have a huge amount of tailwind and China is facing a huge amount of headwinds. And who we should trust, like I said, is Russia. Russia's Lavrov starts China visit with call to reduce US dollar use. So Russia is running against the wind here, folks. India cannot provide it the necessary ballast that Russia now needs to stay afloat, right? Next you have US-China meeting ends without a breakthrough. That was to be expected, right? India defense ties a priority for US, Austin says. And this is something we really need to continue to build on. It says India-US seek deeper ties to counter China. Defense Secretary says he brought up human rights. But like I said, the United States was going to find a let me off. So what does he say about the S-400 when asked the question, Mr. Secretary Austin? No question of discussing curbs as India yet to get S-400, says Austin. Okay, so that's democratic speak to avoid a question, right? And not hurt India. And then held discussions on human rights in a meaningful way, says Austin. What is a meaningful way? Actually, now it comes to light. Is that he mentioned it when Afghanistan was brought up. But the message was sent to India, let's face it. Right? But this is what is going to be our challenge, the S-400, the human rights issues. But currently, like I said, the importance of the defense relationship is such, the importance of China is such that most likely the United States will overlook it, folks, and give us the space. Jai Hind.